you join us for some breaking news regarding the conflict in the Middle East and that ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. We can cross over live to Jerusalem to my colleague Joe Inwood, who will bring us up to date. Joe, what is this breaking news?
So in the last hour or so, the militant group Palestinian Islamic Jihad have released a hostage video of Alexander Trufanov, also known as Sasha. He's a 28-year-old. He's one of the 100 or so Israelis and internationals who are still thought to be held in the Gaza Strip. And he speaks to the camera. He looks bearded, he looks gaunt, but he is clearly alive in the video. Now, we don't know exactly when it was taken, but he does refer to the war in Lebanon and the escalation of it. So it suggests it would be within the last month and a half or so. And his main message is he asked people not to forget the hostages.
OK, Joe, thank you so much for bringing that to us. Just in terms of the situation on the ground there, of course, we know that the United States has given Israel a 30-day deadline in which to improve conditions on the ground in Gaza to enable aid to get through. That deadline has now expired. Has the situation improved at all?
If you speak to the United Nations, then if anything, it's got worse. This was a letter that was written by Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, as you say, 30 days ago. And last night was the deadline for the humanitarian situation to improve, for humanitarian access to improve. And the Americans have said that Israel has not done everything it could do, but it has done enough. The situation is improving, and so the threat of sanctions, the threat of arms deliveries being withheld, those have gone away. But certainly the United Nations, charities, international aid agencies working there say things are as bad as ever. The description that they used about a week ago or so for the situation in the north of the Gaza Strip was apocalyptic. Just to give you some of the numbers, before this conflict started, around 500 to 600 trucks a day would enter the Gaza Strip. The Americans said that there needed to be about 350 entering. And the United Nations say that that figure per day over the last month or so has been about 30. Now, it is worth pointing out that Israel always denies that there is starvation in the Gaza Strip. They say it's simply false, and they pointed out yesterday to the fact they opened up another crossing. But still, the warning we're getting from the UN and other bodies is that the situation, especially in the north, is dire.
OK, Joe, as always, many thanks. Joe Inwood there, and also thank you for bringing that breaking news regarding the hostage video. Thank you. When we get more on that, we'll come back to you. Joe Inwood there, live in Jerusalem. Well, the Biden administration says that it will not withhold weapon shipments to Israel, and this comes as that 30-day deadline for Israel to significantly alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza expired that we were discussing there. US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said that while Israel has taken some important steps towards addressing America's demands, their actions will continue to be monitored. Now, last month, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, gave Israel an ultimatum of those 30 days to ensure more aid trucks reached Gaza daily or risk losing the supply of US weapons. Well, as this deadline expired, the Israeli army announced the opening of a new aid crossing into Gaza, but the UN agencies are saying that Israel has not done enough to meet the threshold. Well, this deadline comes as Israel's President Isaac Herzog is in Washington, and he's holding talks with Joe Biden. We can talk to Michael Fakhri, who's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food. So we know, Michael, that deadline has expired, and we know that the figures when it comes to trucks coming in are not high enough according to the UN. Just give us an insight into your assessment of what is happening on the ground in Gaza.
The situation in Gaza continues to be incredibly dire. What we hear from famine experts and from humanitarian workers on the ground, and it's just a matter of days before this catastrophe becomes even worse. And I'll give you an example. For the last 2 weeks, for all of November, Israel has denied all the UN requests to access northern Gaza. There was one exception. On November 11th, the World Food Program made it to Beit Hanun, which is in the northeast of Gaza. This was the first relief anyone received in Beit Hanun for 1 month. So World Food Program provided food, water, and medical supplies. Well, what happened the next day is on November 12th, Israel attacked civilians and threatened civilians, forcing then everyone to be displaced yet again. So even when humanitarian relief finally makes it through, we're seeing civilians being targeted and civilian infrastructure being targeted. So it's not just a matter of just humanitarian aid, it's the destruction of civilian infrastructure and the food system itself.
What do we make, Michael? You're joining us from Qatar, and we know that Qatar is withdrawing from its role as mediator between Israel and Hamas. It's saying that the two sides are simply refusing to negotiate in good faith. What do you do going forward if Qatar steps away from this?
I mean, I can't speak to Qatar's position directly. What I can speak to is the situation for civilians in Gaza. And I can speak to the Americans' complicity. The Americans continue to ignore facts on the ground. They continue to ignore their own staff that have reported famine and starvation in Gaza. And the politicians are choosing to continue to provide weapons to Israel. This makes the United States complicit in genocide and starvation. It's nothing less than that. What everyone knows is to prevent starvation and genocide in Gaza requires an immediate ceasefire. And Israel is not being pressured in any real way. So this requires an arms embargo and sanctions against Israel by the entire international community. We're at the point where we can't negotiate ourselves out of genocide. We must end it immediately.
Of course, Israel would always deny and refute the use of that word, genocide. But for the time being, Michael Fakhri, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to food, thank you very much for speaking to us here on BBC News about the ongoing crisis in Gaza.